deciding where to put it. Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at our top stories. The US backs Russia at the United Nations, voting against condemning them for starting the Ukraine war. President Donald Trump meets with Emmanuel Macron in Washington and says the conflict could end within weeks. Hamas says it will not move on with the Gaza ceasefire talks until Israel releases Palestinian prisoners. This comes as Israel expands operations in the West Bank, deploying IDF tanks for the first time in decades. South Korea's court has heard the closing statements in Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment trial. This comes after his short-lived declaration of martial law in December. In Amiens, France, the country's biggest ever child sex trial kicks off. An ex-surgeon stands accused of raping and sexually assaulting 299 victims. Russian missiles target Kyiv amid high-stakes diplomatic talks. Ukraine declares a nationwide air alert as Russian missiles head towards the capital. Authorities warn of major strikes and urge residents to seek shelter. On the other hand, Trump, Macron and Putin take centre stage in negotiations that could shape Ukraine's future. Let's take a look in this report.
Amid escalating tensions, Donald Trump declares the war could end within weeks. Meanwhile, the US openly backs Russia at the United Nations. Washington and Moscow align first in a morning vote at the General Assembly and again in an afternoon vote at the Security Council.
The United States sincerely appreciates Council members' support for this resolution and applauds the action, the first this Council has taken in 3 years on Ukraine, to firmly call for an end to the conflict. This resolution puts us on the path to peace. It is a first step, but a crucial one.
Да, кстати говоря, что касается новых территорий, то же самое. Мы готовы привлечь иностранных партнеров и так называемые новые наши исторические территории, которые вернули в состав Российской Федерации. Там тоже есть запасы определенные. Мы готовы с нашими партнерами, в том числе с американскими, работать там.
В новых регионах тоже.
Да, конечно.
Diplomatic moves intensify as the UN Security Council passes a US-led resolution on Ukraine with Russian support. The resolution passes 10-0 but avoids direct criticism of Moscow. In a shift, Trump claims Putin may accept a limited presence of European peacekeepers in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomes this, stressing that Ukraine must be included in peace talks.
Только приветствуем. Мы благодарны всем нашим партнерам, которые поднимают эти вопросы, которые стремятся к тому, чтобы мир был достигнут. И к чему я говорю? Не только европейцы, но и другие страны имеют право и могут участвовать, и мы относимся к этому с уважением.
Meanwhile, Putin escalates his rhetoric, calling Ukrainian President Zelensky a toxic figure. At the same time, Chinese President Xi Jinping reaffirms China's support for Russia, strengthening Moscow's position. As the conflict continues, Russia claims its companies are in touch with US businesses for joint projects post-war, all while global leaders discuss peace. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's stay in Europe for more of the latest updates from that continent. Germany's election winner Friedrich Merz has extended an invitation to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to visit Germany despite an International Criminal Court arrest warrant against him for alleged war crimes in Gaza. Merz expressed his intention to find a way for Netanyahu to travel to and from Germany without arrest, potentially challenging Germany's obligations under international law as a signatory to the Rome Statute. The ICC has reminded member states of their legal obligations to enforce its decision. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has announced a lifelong income tax exemption for mothers with 2 or more children. This lowers the previous threshold from 4 children. The policy was set to begin in October for mothers of 3 kids and in January for those with 2. The policy aims to address the country's declining birth rate and support the economy ahead of the 2026 national election. Despite the high costs, Orbán believes the reviving economy and full employment will sustain these benefits while reducing the budget deficit and public debt. Russian President Vladimir Putin has convened a meeting to discuss the enhancement of the country's railway infrastructure. The discussion focused on strategies to improve railway production and expand the network to support economic development and strategic mobility. This initiative is part of Russia's broader efforts to modernise its transportation system and address logistical challenges. Mohamed Amra, known as The Fly, was arrested in Romania after a 9-month manhunt. He escaped in May 2024 when gunmen attacked a prison van in Normandy, France, killing 2 guards. 30-year-old Amra was serving time for robbery and was under investigation for murder. Well, French authorities believe he was planning plastic surgery to hide his identity. The attack was linked to the Black Mafia family, a violent gang involved in drug trafficking. At least 24 people have been arrested. A Russian military court has sentenced a man to 16 years in prison for providing Ukraine with a date on a military site near Moscow. This sentence is part of a series of similar cases where individuals have received lengthy prison terms for alleged espionage activities. For instance, in November 2024, engineer Daniel Mukhametov was sentenced to 16 years for sharing military information with Ukrainian intelligence. Hamas has now stated that they will not adhere to the truce regulations unless Palestinian prisoners are released. This comes after Israel had postponed the release of inmates due to alleged humiliation of hostages during their release. Here is the full report.
In recent developments from the Middle East, Hamas has now stated that they will not abide by the ceasefire unless Israel releases 620 Palestinian prisoners who were scheduled to be freed last Saturday. Hamas official Bassem Naim also said that Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu is intentionally sabotaging the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which looks more fragile than ever. Meanwhile, the United Nations has stated that they are gravely concerned about rising violence in the West Bank.
In Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, where the suffering has been unbearable, I repeat my call for an independent investigation into grave violations of international law committed by Israel in the course of its attacks across Gaza and by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups.
This comes after the Israeli military sent tanks into the West Bank for the first time in more than 2 decades. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said the latest raid across the West Bank was expanding, and that troops would remain in the area's urban hotspots for the coming year. IDF has deployed tanks, destroyed vast areas of the Jenin refugee camp, carved out roadways and made preparations to set up a base there. On the other hand, Healthcare Workers Watch, a Palestinian medical NGO, said it had confirmed that 162 medical staff remained in Israeli detention and a further 24 were missing after being taken from hospitals during the conflict. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates coming in from across the Indo-Pacific region. In South Korea, Cheonan, at least 2 people have been killed with 5 others injured after a bridge collapsed. The tragedy took place at the expressway construction site in Cheonan at around 9:50 a.m. on February the 25th. 5 50-metre steel structures fell, trapping 3 workers under rubble. Authorities have launched a rescue mission to find those still missing. 4 of the injured people are in a critical condition. Acting President Choi Sang-mok has ordered the urgent mobilisation of resources for the operation. Chinese advisor Chen Song-ji has proposed lowering the marriage age to 18 to address the country's declining birth rate. Currently, men can marry at 22 and women at 20, one of the highest age thresholds globally. Chen believes this change would align with international standards and help boost demographic growth. The proposal comes as China faces a shrinking population, falling marriage rates and the lasting effects of the one-child policy. This comes despite the government allowing for up to 3 children in each family. The European Union has started easing sanctions on Syria, lifting restrictions on energy, transport and banking to support the country's economic recovery. This decision follows the formation of an interim administration by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, with Ahmad al-Sharaa appointed as interim president. The EU aims to support Syria's peaceful political transition, with further sanctions to be lifted based on progress. However, they remain ready to reimpose measures if Syria's new leadership deviates from the inclusive government promises. Beijing defended its defence spending on Tuesday, calling it entirely necessary. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin backed a proposal by US President Donald Trump to cut defence budgets for Russia, the US and China. Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian emphasised that China's defence spending is vital to safeguard national security, sovereignty and development interests. He also reaffirmed China's commitment to peaceful development and maintaining world peace. French President Emmanuel Macron and US President Donald Trump have discussed the war in Ukraine, with Macron calling talks feasible and stressing that peace talks must include security guarantees for Ukraine.
In a significant meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron and US President Donald Trump have discussed the ongoing war in Ukraine. Ukrainian ally Macron called the talks feasible, referring to Trump's return at White House, a game changer. He insisted that any peace talks should be backed by a security guarantee for Ukraine.
Nous voulons la paix. Cette paix ne peut pas signifier la capitulation de l'Ukraine. Cette paix ne peut pas être un cessez-le-feu sans garantie. Cette paix doit prévoir les conditions d'une souveraineté ukrainienne, permettre à l'Ukraine de négocier avec les parties prenantes toutes les questions qui la touchent et pour laquelle elle est seule légitime à négocier. Et c'est une paix dans laquelle nous devons prendre nos responsabilités pour maintenir dans la durée sécurité et stabilité pour l'Ukraine et pour toute la région. Et pour nous, Européens, c'est une question existentielle.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has highlighted the necessity of greater European involvement in security, aligning with Macron's call for a more prominent European role in Ukraine's defence.
It's why we're sending £4.5 billion in military aid to Ukraine this year. That's more than ever before, working with our international partners to guarantee security in Ukraine for generations to come, because I strongly believe that whatever happens next, Ukraine must be in as strong as possible. We must get peace through this place.
The idea of European peacekeeping forces has been raised, though it remains a point of contention. In other discussions, German political leader Friedrich Merz has weighed in, asserting that Europe must assert more independence from the United States, particularly in foreign policy and security matters, calling for greater autonomy in handling international conflicts like the war in Ukraine. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now for the latest from the world of business. Tesla has begun offering advanced self-driving functions in China, including autopilot on city streets and driver attention detection. This update follows years of regulatory hurdles in the world's largest auto market. The move comes as Tesla faces stiff competition from local rival BYD, which is expanding its own autonomous technology. The world's largest nature conservation conference has restarted in Rome after collapsing last year. Talks broke down over funding disagreements between rich and developing nations. Countries are negotiating how to meet a $200 billion every year pledge for biodiversity by 2030. Global political tensions and financial conflicts continue to stall progress. South Korea's central bank has cut interest rates and revised its annual growth forecast downwards. This signals mounting concerns over the nation's economic stability. The decision comes amid ongoing global economic pressures, including the impact of US tariffs and the lingering effects of President Yoon Suk Yeol's brief declaration of martial law last year. The rate cut aims to stimulate domestic demand and mitigate slowing growth as South Korea grapples with weakened exports and rising geopolitical tensions. Amazon-backed Anthropic has launched its smartest AI model, Claude 3.7 Sonnet. This is alongside a digital agent called Claude Code, designed for software developers. Claude Code can edit files, run tests and handle complex coding tasks, aiming to compete with OpenAI's latest innovations. This move highlights the intensifying AI race as companies push for faster, more capable tools. Germany's DAX index rose 0.6% after Friedrich Merz Conservative won the national election, raising hopes for economic recovery. European defence stocks gained, but market uncertainty remains over Donald Trump's tariff plans. Meanwhile, the euro strengthened and Just Eat takeaway shares soared on a takeover offer. Apple has announced a $500 billion investment in the US over the next 4 years, creating 20,000 jobs focused on AI, R&D and manufacturing. President Donald Trump credited his administration for the move, while Apple plans to open a new facility in Houston by 2026 and launch a manufacturing academy in Detroit. A former French surgeon, 74-year-old Joel Lescornec, began his trial on Monday, facing charges of raping and sexually assaulting nearly 300 patients. The majority of the victims were children at the time. This case is one of the largest child sex abuse scandals in France's history. The hearing was officially opened by Judge Aude Barresi in the western city of Vannes.
A former French surgeon began his trial on Monday, facing charges of raping and sexually assaulting nearly 300 patients, the majority of whom were children at the time. This is considered one of the largest child sex abuse cases in the country. Judge Aude Barresi officially began the hearing in the western city of Vannes as 74-year-old Joel Lescornec took his seat in the defendant's box.
Écoutez, Joel Lescornec a montré qu'il était dans un esprit de coopération à l'égard de la justice, à l'image d'ailleurs du volontarisme qui a été le sien au cours de ses interrogatoires pendant près de 5 mois chez le juge d'instruction. Nous n'avons pas un accusé qui est mutique, désinvolte, extrêmement agressif dans son propos, mais quelqu'un qui, au contraire, se plie complètement au procès, quelqu'un qui, comme cela lui a été demandé, souhaite s'exprimer à l'égard de chacune des victimes dans cette affaire et qui va le faire.
The former surgeon was already serving a 15-year sentence for abusing children, including 2 nieces, and faces up to 20 more years if convicted in this case. He acknowledges the allegations but claims to not remember all the details. Some survivors also have no recollection of the assaults, as they were unconscious at the time. The president of the court read out names of all the victims in court. A lawyer replied to this.
Ça participe à leur visibilisation. Et ça, c'était quelque chose d'important, d'une liste qui fait froid dans le dos par la longueur, mais où chaque identité a été rappelée. Et la liste était longue, et en tout cas, M. Lescornec a été particulièrement attentif à la longueur de cette liste. Et nous avions un visuel sur l'amphithéâtre. Aucun mouvement, c'était, je pense, quelque chose de très solennel. Un moment lourd, un moment long, mais un moment nécessaire.
One of the victims, Amelie Lefik of age 42, said she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. However, she also admitted feeling afraid to face the former doctor. In his notes, the doctor referred to himself as a major pervert and a pedophile, adding that he was very happy about it. The trial will be open to the public, but the testimony from victims who were minors at the time will be heard in private over 7 days. Bureau Report, NewsX.
That is all we have time for, but we'll be back very soon with more of your latest international news updates.